Hey little axolotls, welcome to another video, or if you are new here, welcome to the tank. My name is Ezra and this is a space where I talk about what it is like as an adult healing from childhood trauma, along with someone at the intersections of race, gender, sexuality, a lot of other things. And hi, happy New Year, happy 2023, I say as it is already May. I wanted to do this video, and you may have seen in the community tabs, but I wanted to make a video talking about my experience getting a hysterectomy, because that happened about 6 or so weeks ago, almost 2 months ago actually, and I wanted to talk about that process and the ins and outs of that for me. And this is talking about my experience on the public system in Australia, because that's where I live. So you might be asking, or I suppose we should kind of take this back as to why I've decided to get a hysterectomy and how that process was for me internally. Now, I initially, if you don't already know, because it's a hysterectomy, I was assigned female at birth. I have been identifying as trans since 2000 and out as trans since 2015. At that time, I identified as trans male because really all I knew was very binary, and I thought, hey, I don't feel the identity of a woman, I don't identify with that, so I must be a male. It was about a year after that, in 2016, that I came out as non-binary. When it comes to gender affirming surgeries or procedures or anything like that, for me personally, I started hormones. I started testosterone back in 2015. I was on that for about a year. Then in 2016, I stopped taking testosterone around about the time when I actually had top surgery, which was with Dr. Steve Merton through through Macquarie University Hospital, and that was the time I came out as non-binary. So I had a double mastectomy at that point in time. Now, I was off of testosterone for about a couple of years. It wasn't until 2020 that I restarted my hormone journey. So with that out of the way, let's talk about why I've decided to get a hysterectomy. Now, I have never really felt comfortable. It's been very dysphoric for me to have my period, both from a trans-related sense, I suppose, but also when it comes to my own trauma. And I haven't ever, I don't think, planned on having my own biological children. It's just not something that interested me. It's something that made me feel quite uncomfortable from, again, both a dysphoric and triggering perspective. So I decided late last year that I wanted to start the process of getting a hysterectomy. And the way that I went about it is that I saw my sexual health physician at Taylor Square Private Clinic, which is where I first started and then restarted taking testosterone. Now, if you don't know what a sexual health physician is, essentially they're like a general practitioner, except that they have extra credentials. So there's such thing as like an endocrinologist, right, which is typically what a lot of trans people go to, or at least in the past, before sexual health physicians were so available, I suppose. But a sexual health physician can also prescribe hormone replacement therapy, along with other things to do with STDs and stuff like that. So I went to her because they can also give you referrals to other gender affirming care providers and things like that. I called up the hospital, which was Royal Women's Hospital, which is through Prince of Wales in Randwick in Sydney. And the reason why I wanted to go through the public system is because obviously I don't have hospital insurance, so it's not something that was affordable to me to go through that process. Through Royal Women's Hospital, I had my first appointment on the 6th of September. I do have notes here. And on that appointment, it wasn't with the surgeon, typically it's with a doctor or their fellow, but that one, it was basically discussing my medical history along with my transition history. And that was a very brief appointment compared to the second one after that. Now, the second one was on the 24th of October, and that was the appointment that I spoke to one of my surgeon's fellows. I was told that it could be up to a 12-month wait list. I also had the option of putting myself on a cancellation list, and he was taking me through what the procedure was and the options that come along with that. With my surgery, I had a laparoscopical, I had keyhole surgery, which is where they put in, and trigger warning for imagery here, that's just a diagram of where they do the incision sites and how that works. But they do the four incision sites, and they insert a camera through one of those. Instead of obviously the full abdominal hysterectomy where they make the incision and they take everything out, but I think it works where they put in a thing and it like grinds it. I don't know, it's weird. That was my option, unless of course there were going to be any potential complications with surgery, but I had to determine that beforehand by getting a internal ultrasound, and also needed to have a appointment with a psychiatrist so that they could essentially determine that I was of sound mind, not crazy, to make that informed decision for myself, as it is it's a medical procedure that takes out organs essentially. So for me, I had everything removed. I had my ovaries, uterus, fallopian tubes, all of it taken out. I wish that there were less hoops to jump through for both trans people and then also young cis women that are wanting to go through with a procedure like this, because there is a lot of ageism that comes into play as well for cis women that want to go ahead with a that want to go ahead with a hysterectomy, because, you know, they're still fertile and of childbearing age kind of thing, right? So I had to see a psychiatrist. Thankfully, that was relatively quick to get into. I ended up contacting the same psychiatrist that I spoke to when I initially got on hormones, and had to receive a letter for that as well, along with when I had top surgery. And that is Dr. Mike Scott. I think I briefly talked about him before on my LGBT channel that I ran like a couple of years ago, but he runs an office in Neutral Bay. He's lovely, highly recommend for trans-related care. And I spoke to him, he wrote the letter. I received a text on the 11th of November, which was a day after my internal ultrasound was done, just advising that I've been put on the wait list. So I thought, okay, ignore that for a while, that'll come around when it comes around. However, on the 22nd of February this year, 2023, I did receive a message from the hospital, or a call from the hospital, sorry, informing me that someone had cancelled and that there was an opportunity for me to come in on the 1st of March, which was a week later. I said yes to that. I had an appointment a couple of days beforehand from the anesthesiologist. That was just over the phone, discussing the risks and the possible complications involved. The day before surgery, I got contacted by the admissions team with the time that I was supposed to come into surgery. And my admission time was 6:45 in the morning. I was fairly anxious the day of, like, obviously because it is a big surgical procedure. Even though it isn't the full hysterectomy, it still does take, I think, around about like 3 hours, 2 to 3 hours, I think it was, for the operation. Obviously the day of, it was the check-in procedures and everything, but I went under anesthetic and I woke up to my partner in my room. She went home and then she came back after she knew that I was out of the theatre. And a bit of a TMI, trigger warning, hospital things and contraptions here. When I woke up from the hysterectomy, which it went well, like it was the keyhole as expected, everything was fine, but you still have a cannula in, which was connected to my pain medication, which I think was fentanyl, and then also a catheter as well, which is the one that goes in your urethra and for urine draining and things. I also had a breathing tube thing, but I knew that that would happen. I knew that that could potentially be triggering for me. However, it wasn't, I guess it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. And I think a lot of that has to do with the environment that I was in. So because it was the Royal Women's Hospital, or at least my experience there, I don't know whether that's part of their hiring process, but there weren't any males, like as in there weren't any cis male nurses or anything like that that were attending to me, at least. I also had my own room, which was quite fortunate. They do try to, and when I was at the second appointment, the fellow was explaining to me that they do try to have trans patients, so people who are gender non-conforming or non-binary or trans males, like they try to give us our own rooms when they can, of course, just because it can be quite dysphoria inducing, unsettling to be identifying it, like to be in a room with a woman, and it's very like, you know, female-centered, woman-centric, like surgery. I was only there for one night. Here, or at least with this surgeon, you do have to stay at least one night just for monitoring and things like that to make sure your blood pressure, all of that's going okay, and to manage your pain and things. Honestly, my pain was pretty okay during the course of that. I did have a little buzzer thing that was clipped up to me, so I could push that whenever I was starting to get an onset of pain for the fentanyl drip. In the morning, the pain team came and did their checks to determine whether I could have the catheter taken out, essentially, because that's the first thing that I had to have done. When that was taken out, they had to do a urine test, like whether I was able to urinate by myself, basically. And that went fine, so at that point I was able to have the cannula taken out as well. So I went in on the Wednesday morning. I was discharged Thursday afternoon. How I was feeling at the time, like physically, is things were quite, things felt quite like tight. It wasn't overly painful, like I would probably say it maybe a 6 or so out of 10. But yeah, everything just felt tight. I was kind of like duck walking to the car, because it was, I had limited movement, a limited range of movement. I felt that I was doing quite fine upon discharge. I honestly, I did overdo it on the Saturday because I felt okay. I ended up going out shopping. Lesson learned though, because the night that happened, I felt very crampy and things felt very tight and painful. So when they tell you to rest, you should really rest. Like, not full bed rest, because they obviously encourage you to walk around a bit and get used to that again. I learned my lesson though, and was resting after that, making sure to keep the incision sites clean. They have the gauze over it for, I think it was 3 to 5 days, and then you can take that off, and that's using, like, it's got the shower-proof gauze tape or whatever it's called. I unfortunately did have an infection at one of the sites. I had antibiotics though that cleared that up pretty quickly, so that was fine. Another thing that I do want to talk about, which is kind of part of this whole procedure for me, is that I'd spoken and I'd been thinking about this prior to the surgery, is changing my hormones, because your body needs hormones to be able to live, or something scientific. I don't know. I'm not a doctor, but I no longer wanted to be on testosterone. I myself, I identify as non-binary, right? And there are obviously pros and cons to like any hormone or any gender affirming care, right? But for me, one of the main reasons why I was taking testosterone was because I wanted to no longer have my period, and that's a large part of that. Obviously, things like facial hair came along with that, but ultimately, at this point where I am with my gender and my gender expression and everything, and especially now that I don't have those parts that induce a period, right, is that I wanted to change over to estrogen. And I spoke to one of the nurses in my team at the hospital, because I wanted to go through my regular general practitioner instead of having to go into Taylor Square private clinic to see my sexual health physician. And my surgeon gave me the go-ahead to make that changeover, and she put through a referral or care plan for me to my existing general practitioner, just so she knows how to go about my hormone replacement care. I started taking estrogen, estradiol, the gel, and I've been taking that since my discharge for the surgery. So since the beginning of March. March 1st was the day of my surgery, and I haven't had any like issues taking that, because it is just the gel. Like, I have that once a day. That's all going fine. I can update later down the line if I do have, well, I mean, obviously I'm going to have some changes because my facial hair isn't going to look like this in a couple of months down the line, who knows, so I might do an update on that in a couple of months. I did find out though, because I had my follow-up consultation on the 24th of April, so that was like a week ago. That was like, the consult went fine. They just felt around the incision sites, asked me how things were going. They did ask if I wanted to have a physical checkup internally on how things were healing up, but honestly, for me, I hadn't experienced any like worrying symptoms internally, apart from the day, 2 days after, when I overexerted myself. But I did find out at that appointment that when they were doing the operation and everything, they found out that I had endometriosis. And I was like, huh, the more you know. I have feelings about that as well, just because it is quite common. And when I was speaking about this to my therapist, I was like, oh, it turns out I have endometriosis. We were speaking about how it is quite common for people who have gone through CSA to have that. And I didn't know how to feel about that. And I still kind of don't, because and obviously it's not, all people that have that, but it is fairly common, right? And yeah, I don't know how to feel about it. It is somewhat validating in a way, but also it's like validating in that it feels like it gives like tangible affirmation or evidence kind of thing that did happen. But at the same time, I don't like that because it makes it feel more real. But those are my feelings about that. I hope that I didn't babble too much in this video, and that this has answered any questions that you might have about the process of having a hysterectomy and my experience having that here in Australia. But if there was something that I didn't possibly address, or something that you might want to know more about, definitely ask questions in the comments down below, and I will attempt to get back to those. If you want to ask them in a more private space, I suppose, you can email my business email for my WordPress, which I'll put it in the description down below, but I do believe it's enquiries@axolotlsinatrenchcoat.com, but I will put it down there. So if you want to ask a more in-depth question in a more private way that can't be seen like on YouTube, feel free to shoot me a message through there and I will endeavor to get back to you. Otherwise, yeah, happy new queer, happy new year, happy 2023. I hope that the year is going okay for most of you. Well, no, okay for all of you, or like even better than okay. But yeah, keep swimming, little axolotls, and always remember to be authentic, be accountable, and be inclusive. And we will see you for the next video. Bye.